Well, good evening, Kopernik YouTubers. Glad to have you with us here tonight. We're very fortunate again to have Phil Cooper here to do his presentation that will wrap up the Apollo missions. But just want to again thank you all for joining us this evening. Looking forward to Phil's program. Also, just to let you know that in a couple weeks we will do our traditional Black Holes on Black Friday. Roe Williams of the Kopernik staff will do his program on black holes on the Friday after Thanksgiving, Black Friday, and that will also be an 8 p.m. Live stream. And let's see here, it's starting to get a little cool, but yet it's been fun. As long as it's not raining, there've been people out on the Kopernik Science Park playground, so that's been good. We also still have a number of the Kopernik Science Park face masks. So if you're looking for, if you're starting to go, look at your face masks and they're starting to get a little weary, go out to our website and you can order yourself a lovely Kopernik Science Park face mask. And so if any questions about that, you can also put that in the chat, and we can direct you there. So, again, Phil's been a really just a super supporter of Kopernik and has done just some great things for us. For those that I may have mentioned this earlier, but if you're just joining us sort of for the first time, back last year I got a call from Phil saying, "Hey, I've got a pretty detailed, model of the Saturn V and command module and lunar module, and would there be any interest in having that on display at Kopernik?" I said, "Well, yeah, sure, bring it down," and it was just outstanding. Phil, I can't imagine. I got to watch you work. It's the detail that you put into that. Those models were fantastic, and then he's done again a number of programs on Apollo 11, Apollo 12, Apollo 13, and now we'll sort of finish up with the Full Circle program. And I'll have to talk to you about getting you to do some other programs going forward. But anyway, so let's go ahead and move on that. Phil, if you want to go ahead and unmute yourself, and I will go back to. Well, we'll be on speaker view, so as soon as you share your program, we'll get started.
Everybody. Okay, we should be good to go. Drew, can you hear me? We are set. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining on this Friday the 13th. When I think about it, I probably should have asked Drew to do Apollo 13 on the 13th and done the other Apollos at a later date. But it's good that we're going to come and wrap up the program. The Apollo missions were one of the greatest things I feel that this country has ever done, and it also is one of the greatest things that has been done in the world, is exploration of another body. And we started out in 1971, starting to wrap up the program with Apollos 14 and 15. Then in 1972, we had Apollo 16 and 17. And I'd like to just briefly go over these Apollo patches, because there's always some nice meaning in them, and the crews really take a lot of time to put a lot of time into them. For Apollo 14, they had the astronaut wing symbol flying to the moon for Shepard, Russa, and Mitchell. Apollo 15 chose a bit of a different route. They went to an Italian clothing designer, and he made kind of a green and brown and yellow type affair, but they took it and they changed it into the red, white, and blue that you see here. Apollo 16 took the NASA swoosh and made it gold, 16 stars around it for Apollo 16, and the moon in the background. And for Apollo 17, they really put a lot of work into that one because they knew it was going to be the last one because the other missions had been canceled. And this one has the Greek god Apollo from a famous statue in the Vatican. It also has an eagle above it, and the eagle is looking out into the universe. And the one wing is touching the moon because we've already been there, and it's saying, you know, the moon was just the first step, and we're going out into the future. So they really think a lot about these. So I always like to review them so we can appreciate them. We're going to break the program up into two sections because rather than go over each mission individually, I'd like to look at them from a perspective of precision landings and science missions. Beginning with Apollo 15, there were a lot of changes in the program. It really hit its stride, and there were substantial differences in the missions. Before that, with Apollo 14 was kind of on a cleanup mission because Apollo 13 didn't make it. So they really had the duty and responsibility to make sure that there was a successful mission and they were concerned that 14 might be the last one if it didn't work properly because they'd already had canceled 18, 19, and 20, and Congress was looking to cut more as well as President Nixon. By hitting its stride, the science missions have a different lunar module. Apollos 11, 12, 13, and 14 were all about precision landings. They really didn't know with Apollo 11 that they were actually going to land on the moon then. It could have happened on 12. It could have happened, gosh, what if it happened on 13? That would have been a bit tragic. But they really didn't know. And they had a new lunar module on the drawing boards that they were putting out. The precision landings, the early lunar modules, they were good for 2 moonwalks, about 3 to 4 hours. They spent a total of 33 hours on the moon. But this new lunar module for 15 through 20, but unfortunately it stopped at 17, they got 3 big moonwalks out of it of 7, 8 hours a moonwalk. They spent a total of 75 hours on the moon. They carried a rover, a moon buggy, which we're going to get into a little later, and a lot of science experiments. It was also an attitude shift. The precision landings were all about kind of fighter pilot, flying, we've got to make it, proving the equipment worked. But now the equipment works. They need to get down to the science. They need to show why we went to the moon. Where to explore on these last missions. We've landed on Apollo 11 and Apollo 12, which are in the seas, the oceans, they call them, which are very flat, very smooth. They're volcanic in nature, and Apollo 11 and 12 really hit the same type of rocks and the same type of terrain. With Apollo 14, it was going to be a little different. They landed in an area called Fra Mauro, which is where Apollo 13 was going to land, and didn't make it. But still, it's pretty smooth, although it looks like a few more craters than Tranquility. Here actually is the what's left of the descent stage of the lunar module, which stays on the moon of Apollo 14. And you can see their little tracks here a little bit to go out to Cone Crater, which is right here. That really was their whole mission, was to, again, to make it safe, make it where they were supposed to be, get out some experiments, but then get over to Cone Crater on their second moonwalk, and then that was going to be it. So they landed here where there's a little bit different territory. Now, if we look at the moon here, we see the dark seas, and then there's these whiter parts. These are different types of rocks, and that's what they're all about, is finding different rocks. So Apollo 15, now I always thought this was exciting because this is the Apennine Mountains here. And Apollo 15 was going to go down right into the mountains. So this is not anything but flat here. They come down through the mountains, and they land right next to a rill, which is a little mini canyon. And that's formed by some lava underneath the surface collapsing, and it makes a little divot. We'll see some pictures of that. that later. So big challenge to get down in there, but they're confident now. They're going to take this new lunar module out for a spin. Apollo 16 going right in the white area, the different types of rocks. Whiter means older on the moon. And 16 was going into the highlands called the Descartes Highlands. And older rocks, again, they're looking for the whiter rocks. And again, this is still pretty chopped up terrain, and we had never landed in the highlands before. Next is Apollo 17, the last one. They got to make it really good. They looked at a lot of sites, and they came up with that Hadley Valley, which has the rill in it, and it also has a lot of the older rocks, but they're coming right into the middle of the valley. I'd like you to just remember this crater here. This is Camelot Crater, and this is where they are planning on landing. And we're going to actually watch through the window of the lunar module one of them landing. So this is the 4 areas that they were going to go to, their last 4 that they could visit. And we're going to explore what they did in each of those areas. The crews. Apollo 14, again, the makeup crew for Apollo 13 had Edgar Mitchell, Alan Shepard, which name should be familiar to everybody. He was our first astronaut in space. He had a flight of 15 minutes, and he went up 115 miles. And Stu Rusa. Now, technically, they were calling this a rookie crew because even though Shepard was the first, it was only 15 minutes. So usually they don't have an all-rookie crew. But there's an interesting story here behind Mr. Shepard. After his flight in 61, he got something in 1963 called Meniere's disease, which made him dizzy and he was not able to fly. So he took a desk job. He kept in touch with the program. He acted like he was going to get a flight because he knew in his heart that this was going to go away. It never went away, but there was a revolutionary new operation that he tried, and it cleared it up for him, and he got his flight status back. Now, they bumped another astronaut for him to take this crew of Apollo 14. But they really wanted one of the Mercury astronauts, which was the first program of our space program, to make it to the moon. So this was an attempt to do that. And the astronaut they bumped, his name was Joe Engel. He ended up with a couple of space shuttle flights. So he didn't get the moon, but he did get to go into space. And Stu Rusa, he again was a rookie. I always liked the story about him. His job in the military was he was a fighter pilot in Germany whose job was to fly a nuclear weapon over Russia at 50 feet above the ground, pitch up, drop his bomb, turn around, and head back to Germany, of which he didn't have enough fuel for. So he had to land somewhere and walk back to Germany. So I really think he had the right stuff to be an astronaut and probably wasn't scared to go to the moon. So this was 14. 15, this is what would be considered, I think, the most educated crew. Between them, they had 6 master's degrees, and they were the first crew that was incredibly psyched to do the science on the moon. Dave Scott is considered a poster boy for an astronaut, tall, good-looking, and completely dedicated to the program. And he went up into space with Al Worden and Jim Irwin, who, again, are both rookies. Crews of 16 and 17. The crew of 16 is Ken Mattingly, John Young, and Charlie Duke. Now, Ken Mattingly might be familiar to you because if you follow Apollo 13, he is the one who got the measles and couldn't fly on Apollo 13. And Charlie Duke should be familiar to you because he's the one that gave Ken Mattingly the measles. So as fate would have it, they were put on the crew together, and they were always great friends and were lifelong friends. And they flew with John Young, who had 4 missions under his belt, so a lot of seniority. And for any of you who has driven from the Orlando airport to Walt Disney World, that highway is the John Young Highway. Next is Apollo 17. This has Harrison Schmitt, Gene Cernan, who's the last person on the moon, and Ron Evans. Of all the astronauts, they were all fighter pilots, military pilots, except Harrison Schmitt. There was a lot of pressure to have a scientist on board, one of the Apollos. And Harrison Schmitt, back in the early 60s, was one of 14 scientists that applied to the Apollo program. None of them made the physical characteristics to become an astronaut and did not make the program. But because there was a lot of pressure to get a scientist, Harrison did the best. But they were firm on one thing, the Apollo program, is he had to be a pilot. So he did go and became a jet pilot. Also a PhD from Harvard in geology. And he really earned his wings in the respect of all the other astronauts. Again, Gene Cernan, the last man, he also had 2 previous flights. Interesting fact about him is he went to Purdue University. So the last man to set foot on the moon went to Purdue, and another Purdue student was Neil Armstrong.
All right, Phil, actually, for a second, just about 30 seconds ago, we heard some sort of scratching, and your audio dropped down pretty significantly. I just want to...
Okay. How is it now?
Yeah, if you could sort of talk at that level, I think we'll be in better shape. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. So Purdue had the distinction of having the first and the first man on the moon and the last man on the moon go to their college. And then Ron Evans, again, very qualified, lots of education. One of the most spectacular launches, and they were all successful for 14 through 17, is the launch of Apollo 17 at night. So I'd like to show you that. And besides it being successful, it has the distinction of being the only launch that had to be delayed by 2 hours. That didn't push it into the night. It was always meant to be 10 o'clock at night. So it always was going to be a launch night. And it was only because that's the way it worked out with the moon. It wasn't just because of the last one that they wanted to try it. So here's the launch, fire in the sky.
Last action taken by the crew aboard the space vehicle. Now approaching the half-minute mark. T-minus 33, T-minus 30 seconds, and continuing on now. Continuing on at the T-minus 26 second mark, T-minus 25. We'll get a final guidance release at the T-minus 17 second mark. T-minus 17, final guidance release. We'll expect engine ignition at 8.9 seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, ignition sequence started. All engines are started. We have ignition, 2, 1, 0. We have a liftoff. We have a liftoff, and it's lighting up the area. It's just like daylight here at Kennedy Space Center as the Saturn V is moving off the pad. It has now cleared the tower.
Tower, you're complete. We're in a row, Bob. Roger, Gino, looking great for us good on all 5 engines. Okay, David, what you do here? Roll is complete. We are ready.
Spectacular launch. I remember watching it live, thinking how fantastic it was. And it was quite a treat to watch all of these live as they happened. They were very exciting. And it was well before you could record these at home. So you had to watch them on TV or you didn't get to watch them again. So once they're in space from the Saturn V launch, the way that they go to the moon is the lunar module is attached to the command module. The command module actually swings back around and pulls the lunar module out of the rocket when it's in orbit. With Apollo 14, it took them 6 attempts to do it. They were getting desperate because if you can't dock to it, then you don't get to go to the moon. The mission is scrubbed, and they were just besides themselves because 13 didn't make it. So what happens if 14 didn't? But they did get it to dock on the 6th attempt, so they were good to go. Apollo always names their command modules and lunar modules. They always have some kind of neat names. They had the Kitty Hawk for the Wright brothers. Endeavour was Captain Cook's ship. But Apollo 16 thought they'd throw in there for Casper because they really wanted to get young people involved. And they felt that the way that the video was coming out at the time, they all kind of looked like Casper the ghost running around on the moon. So those were the names. So now landing on the moon. Just want to explain how they land on the moon because it's different than you might think. So the lunar module comes away from the command module and it starts its descent. But you would think that like something up in the air like that, it would just kind of come down and an engine comes on and it comes down just like you were in our atmosphere, but it doesn't work that way because the lunar module stays in orbit around the moon because it's going very fast. So to come down, it has to turn its engine on to slow down. So the astronauts are actually standing up, looking up at the stars, and they don't see the moon. Computers are running this. So they keep coming down through 50,000 feet. Still to 20,000 feet, they really have yet to see the moon. This engine is firing and slowing them down so they come down. As they get closer, at between 10 and 7,000 feet, something called pitchover begins, and you'll hear them call that out on the video that you're going to watch next. That's when it turns into a traditional landing. They're using their engine to slow down and they're coming straight down until they finally land on the moon. What we're going to watch is Apollo 17. It's Gene Cernan and Jack Schmitt landing on the moon. Jack will be calling out all the numbers. Gene is actually flying the LEM. And when you hear a voice say, stop with the numbers, that means that they've taken over manual control of the LEM.
9. Okay, stand by for pitch over. Oh, are we coming in? Oh, baby. Okay, through 9,000. Stand by for pitch over, Jack. 8,000. I'll need the pro. I'll give it to you. Pitch over is proceeded. And there it is, Houston. There's Camelot. Wow. Target. I see it. We got them all. 42 degrees, 37 degrees, through 5,500. 38 degrees.
Bellinger, your go for landing.
42 degrees through 4,000. 47 now. 47 degrees through 3,500.
Shortly at the top of your
degrees.
screen, you're going to see the shadow of the lunar module as they're coming down.
3,000 feet. 53 degrees. Okay, I've got Jorge, I've got Poppy, I've got the triangle. That's 2,500 feet, 52 degrees. H-dot is good. 2,000. H-dot is good. Fuel is good. 1,500 feet. 54 degrees, Gene. Approaching 1,000. Approaching 1,000 feet. 57 degrees. Okay, you're through 1,000. I'm taking radar altitude and pings altitude degree. You're through 800 feet. H-dot's a little high. Yeah, I don't need the numbers anymore. Okay, you're 31 feet per second, going down through 500. 25 feet per second through 400. That's a little high, Gino. Okay. 300 feet. 15 feet per second. A little high. H-dot's a little high. Okay, I've got P66. Okay. Okay, 9 feet per second down at 200. Going down at 5. Going down at 5. Going down at 10. Cut the H-dot. Your fuel's good. 110 feet. Stand by for some dust. A little forward, Gene. Little forward a little. 90 feet. Little forward velocity. 80 feet. Going down at 3. Getting a little dust. You're at 60 feet. Going down about 2. Very little dust. Very little dust. 40 feet. Going down at 3. Stand by for touchdown. Stand by. 25 feet. Down at 2. Fuel's good. 20 feet. landed.
I'm always amazed when I watch and listen to these landings, how calm they are. The only time they get excited really is when they pitch over and they see that they're where they're supposed to be. But other than that, they just sound like they're just sitting around the house, just so nonchalant. I'm just always amazed by that. So now they're on the moon, and I would like to just cover
About on the bottom.
Alan Shepard.
And on the surface. And
So what Shepard meant by he was a long way here, it meant his personal journey, but also their journey because of Apollo 13. So Apollo 14 is the last of the precision landings. They're going to do some science, but it's not the primary goal of their mission as much as just proving that we could get there again. So the first moonwalk, they set up some experiments. The second moonwalk, they set up this contraption. It's called the MET, called the Modular Equipment Transport, but what they call it for short is the rickshaw. And they're going to carry all their tools and camera, and they're going to go to a crater called Cone Crater, which is really their primary objective. This is an actual picture from orbit. This is the lunar module here. They went around here the first day and set up their experiments. And this is their trek to Cone Crater. They didn't make it. They only got within 65 feet. The reason being is that once they're on the moon, and they found this out because 14 was the first one to really take a long trip away from the lunar module. You can't tell where they are. Everything is flat. There's no turn left at the stoplight. There's no go to the stop sign. It's kind of flat. It undulates. It's all gray. The sun is bright. They got extremely exhausted. Their heart rates were over 115. It just really showed that they need the next science missions that would carry the rover. So this, while it was successful, they called it successful that they got within 65 feet of Cone Crater because they were able to see rocks that were blasted out of it, which is what they're looking for. So Al Shepard had a keen understanding that something had to happen that was different and unique on Apollo 14. So being an avid golfer, of course, he thought, gee, the world would like to see somebody golf from the moon. And that's exactly what he did. He took a golf club head that was custom to go on one of their tools, and he hit 2 golf balls on the moon. And this is captured in a painting by another Apollo astronaut, Al Bean, who was on Apollo 12 and was an outstanding artist of all things Apollo. So this, again, was the last precision landing. Now we begin the science missions with the Lunar Rover. This is the prototype of the Lunar Rover. Hey, it was the 60s. It was definitely a buggy looking, and this was the original prototype going around the track. And you can see where the rover got its nickname, the buggy. This is what it turned out to be. It went 11 miles per hour, battery powered. All total, it went 56 miles on the moon between all 3 missions that carried a rover. It weighed 460 pounds on Earth, but only 76 pounds on the moon. It took them 17 months to build because they decided late into the program that they wanted this. They were going to launch another Saturn V that carried a much larger rover and other equipment and habitats, but the money for that easily dried up. So they had 17 months to build this rover, and they did. Now they had to get it to the moon. Now, if you look at the front, that is not a trailer hitch. To get it to the moon, it had to fold up. So it was folded up like this. They pulled a string, and out it popped, all ready to go. Pop up the seats, put up the antenna, and off they went. This is the Grand Prix. This is on Apollo 16. It's Charlie Duke and Commander Young. They're going to take it out for a test drive. Why they didn't do this on the first mission on 15, I don't know, but they decide that they want to put the rover through its paces. Young is very straight-laced kind of guy, not a lot of humor to him. And Charlie Duke is very much comedic, and he's from North Carolina, so he has NASCAR in his blood. They should switch places. And as you'll hear from the commentary on this little Grand Prix, you'll see why they should have switched.
About 4 minutes worth, John. About a minute 5. If you can do it twice more. Surely. Okay, turn sharp. I have no desire to turn sharp. Okay, here's the Sharpie. Hey, that's great. Man, those things, when those wheels really dig in, John, when you turn it, when you get the rooster tail, that thing is fantastic. That sounds good. We sound like we've probably got enough of the Grand Prix. We're willing to let you go on from here. Grand Prix. Okay. And it was all 4 wheels off the ground there. Okay, max stop. Okay, excuse me. That's a no-no. Okay, Dak off.
Yeah, pretty cool. It looked like it was really fun to drive, and to an astronaut, they said it was absolutely fun. And the crew of Apollo 14, Al Shepard, wished they had that instead of the rickshaw to go to Combe Crater. So the experiments. So again, these are science missions from 15 through 17. They've got the beefed up lunar module. They've got the Lunar Rover. And they've got a lot more experiments that were tucked in to the LEM. One of the big experiments they set up on their first day is something called the ALSEP, which is Apollo Lunar Science Platform. This is a large base centerpiece with an antenna, and this is a nuclear plutonium power source. So throughout the missions, they just plugged different types of experiments in. Some they brought to the moon, didn't work. They bring another one. It's kind of a central hub that they plug it into. This particular one is a passive seismic meter. This aluminum mylar alloy would vibrate with some vibrations on the moon. Then again, some more experiments. These copper wires are heading back to the main base station. This is not a helper droid. This is actually a solar wind experiment that they set up. And this is my favorite one. It's called Thumper. This puts a explosive charge on the base of this board. It vibrates the moon surface, and it's picked up over here by the passive seismometer. They do that because how waves travel underground tells them what's under the ground. It's a way of seeing it. They took an ultraviolet telescope with them that was away from the Earth's atmosphere, and they ended up leaving that on the moon when they were done, and they just brought the film back with them. This has been on all of the Apollo missions. It's a laser reflector, and we use that today. We actually can hit that with a laser beam from the Earth, which I think is one heck of a shot, and it bounces back to Earth, and they measure how much the moon is going away from us, and it does move around 3 or so centimeters a year. So it's not like in our lifetime we're ever going to pick up on that, but over billions of years that will add up. This is the greatest experiment that we brought up there, and that is an Apollo astronaut. You can see him here. He's just set all of his experiments. Now he's ready to really make his worth to why all the money to bring him to the moon. And what they're going to need to do, these astronauts, is the idea that rocks remember. It's a saying that geologists have, that rocks remember where they've been, how they were made, and you can tell a lot from rocks. When Jack Schmitt, the geologist scientist, came to NASA and he went to his first geology class. He knew he was going to be bored because he had his doctorate. He didn't know how bored he was going to be along with everybody. They were teaching theory and chemistry and nothing to do with what the astronauts would need. They were bored. They were doodling. So he called his Caltech old professor, Al Silver, who I have the arrow on, and said, "We need your help." After a little convincing, he got him to conduct field geology classes with all the astronauts to train them how, since rocks remember, how to listen to them and how to know what they're telling you, how to know their story. They went to Iceland several times to study the rocks. They turned into being some campouts and some good fellowship among the astronauts, but they were learning how to read the rocks. Here's Charlie Duke and John Young. Those were our Grand Prix drivers earlier. Here they are with their moon kind of garb on, pretend, and they've been dropped off at a site and they've been asked to tell the history of that geological region. So we've taken the astronauts and we've made them field geologists, and now we're sending them loose out on the moon to find out what they can find. Beautiful picture here, actually one of the more famous Apollo pictures. This is Apollo 17. They're lying down in Hadley Rill. And here is Jack Schmidt, and he is scooping up and raking soil. Again, soil that he has attracted his attention because, again, he's a field geologist. Well, he is because he's got his doctorate. This particular one is Apollo 16, and this is shadow rock. Now, this rock, not like on Earth, wasn't deposited through weather because there's no weather on the moon. This is a huge rock that was blasted from an impact somewhere and happened to land where they are. And they got up a little closer to it, and you can see how it's kind of contorted and all broken up. And we're going to talk about that type of rock a little later on. Astronauts were also able to make core samples, pushing that well into the soil. That way they could see what was underneath and they didn't have to dig too much. Their other great soil sampler were these moon craters, because they excavated very deep into the soil for them. This is just an area where they took a soil sample, but I wanted to point out this little unit here. They dropped this wherever they took a picture, because it gave them a color scale, and this is also a scale for size. Most of the previous Apollos from 14 on down were too nervous and excited to be walking around the moon and concerned about their equipment that they rarely documented anything or took a picture of where they were from. Beginning with 15, the astronauts were very meticulous about that. This is Hadley Rill. This is 15 again. And they've come up to the edge so bad that the astronauts wanted to go down in there. But rightfully so, NASA was concerned that there was a great deal of dust. They weren't sure once they got down in that they'd get back up, but that took a little bit of talking to get the astronauts not to do that. This is Apollo 15 as well. Just wanted to show this one because you can see the back of the rover. That's all their equipment that used to be in the rickshaw. And look how good of drivers these guys were. Look at that. They went right over that rock and went over this one. I don't know if they were really watching what they were doing up there. It's a good thing that that Lunar Rover was bouncing as it went along. This huge rock is called the Boulder, and it's, again, this is Harrison Schmidt. He was taking some samples of it. The really cool thing about this is it cracked when it landed, and then you can also look in here. You'll see where the dust is scraped. That's where Gene Cernan also took a sample. He thought it would be neat to get the dust that was on top of the rock, and he was correct. The moon is the new orange. There's two big events that happened with looking for soil and rocks that happened on the moon. One is the new orange, and one is one we'll go through in a little bit later. But this is what happened when they saw orange.
Oh, hey, weather reflections. I've been fooled once. There is orange soil. Well, don't move it till I see it. It's all over. Orange. Don't move it till I see it. I've stirred it up with my feet. Hey, it is. I can see it from here. It's orange. Wait a minute, let me put my visor up. It's still orange. Sure it is. Crazy. Orange. I've got to dig a trench, Houston. Copy that. I guess we better work fast. It really is.
I think it was Jack Schmidt's voice. I thought he was being a little rude to the other astronaut, but they still seemed very excited. So what did they find? They found this orangish soil down here at the bottom, and that ended up being volcanic. And it was from a fire plume from 3 or 4 billion years ago. And that was exciting because they really hadn't found any evidence of much volcanism on the moon. They found rocks that were melted because of crater impacts, but they were very excited about that. And that became one of the famous rocks of the Apollo program, well, soil. And the next is the Genesis rock. This is a rock that was on Apollo 15, and that was the first Apollo that went to the highlands where the white of the moon was. And they were looking for white rocks because they were old rocks. That they felt that the original crust of the moon was white, and it was made of a rock called a northosite. And here's the Genesis rock. And they felt that that was going to be the oldest rock that they were going to find. As it turned out, it wasn't quite the oldest rock, but it was real close. But the orange and the Genesis rock are the two more well-known rocks that came from the exploration. There was a serious moment on Apollo 15. They decided, the crew decided, that they were going to put a plaque with the names of 14 individuals who died in the space race. They were Soviet and American astronauts with a small little astronaut sculpture. It was a great gesture. NASA wasn't exactly thrilled, but they don't like surprises. But it ended up backfiring, unfortunately, because the artist went and made 1,000 copies and tried to sell them. So, you know, capitalism is crazy.
Jim, we copied both solar wind and penetrometer drum in the ETB.
This is Dave Scott on Apollo 15.
Yes, I haven't put the solar wind in yet, but I will shortly. I want to watch this. I have a good picture there. I've got
beautiful picture, Dave.
Well, in my left hand, I have a feather. In my right hand, a hammer. And I guess one of the reasons we got here today was because of a gentleman named Galileo a long time ago who made a rather significant discovery about falling objects in gravity fields. And we thought that where would be a better place to confirm his findings than on the moon. And so we thought we'd try it here for you. The feather happens to be appropriately a falcon feather for our falcon. And I'll drop the two of them here, and hopefully they'll hit the ground at the same time. How about that? Proves that Mr. Galileo was correct in his findings.
And that was Dave Scott on Apollo 15. I'm sorry, I should have queued that up for you. But that was just something fun they wanted to do. They're really trying to engage people to watch because really not many people watched these. I mean, it's kind of a shame because when it really hit its stride, when there was actually a camera that was watching them, that you could see what they were and they weren't blobs and ghosts, it just really fell out of our conscious. But moon dust. Just want to talk about one last thing about their exploration, and that's moon dust, and it ended up being a very big problem. Here's Jack Schmitt covered in dust, taking a raking sample. Here he is in the lunar module after his second moonwalk. Look how filthy they are. And here's Gene Cernan, his commander. You can see how the soil's on the helmets, it's all over. So you might think, well, okay, so you just bring a dust buster, you wipe it off. Well, moon dust isn't like the dust in our homes. Moon dust is actually from solar bombardment and from micrometeorites and from large impacts. It's little shards of rock and glass that is actually harmful to the astronauts that we ended up learning as the missions went on. It feels like sandpaper when they were brushing it off themselves. And it wore on all the suits, and it was digging into their boots. And they were getting something that was called lunar hay fever, which they were getting runny eyes and noses and getting some congestion. And they feel it was from breathing this in. And this is going to be a huge issue when we return to the moon, because it's something that needs to be addressed because it damages the equipment and the astronauts' health. They are working on it. One of the things with the moon dust, it has a charge because it gets bombarded by the solar wind. So it sticks to you like static electricity. So they're going to run some current through the astronaut suits to hopefully repel it. But they still don't have it licked, and they're going to have to get it licked before we spend some time on the moon. And it's a very dusty place. Can't have a government program without a scandal. The Apollo 15, actually all the astronauts brought what they called first day covers to the moon. Back in ancient times when you used to put a stamp on an envelope and mail it, these were very popular. They had the flight logos printed on them. They got postmarked. As a matter of fact, the astronauts took postmarks with them and postmarked them on the moon. And they were to be brought back and given away as gifts and as mementos to people who worked on the program, space program. Apollo 15 did a little different. They took 400 of them, and they were paid $7,000 each per astronaut, which is $43,000 in today's money. And they took them to the moon, and they shouldn't have. But many astronauts did the same thing. They snuck them on board. They did what Apollo 15 did, but they kept them to sell later when they retired, because they didn't make a lot of money as astronauts. They got their military pay. So Apollo 15 did that, and they said that that was for their families in case something happened to them, because they couldn't get life insurance anymore, beginning with Apollo 15. So as luck would have it, the person that gave them the 400 called NASA to see if it was legitimate that they took them to the moon. It blew up. It was a big thing. The astronauts of Apollo 15 never flew again. And if you think the government is any different today than it was yesterday, or vice versa, there had to be a Senate investigation about the envelope scandal. This is in the middle of a recession in Vietnam. So anyway, it was a big deal. And unfortunately, 3 good astronauts never flew again. Moon bloopers. There were some funny times on the moon, and here's a collection of them.
No, dadgummit. Jack Schmidt having a few problems. Hang on. Yeah. All right. Good show. I told him you were. What? Okay. We see that one went all the way in. Not quite. But there it is, all but about 5 inches. Okay. Boy, do I like to run up here. I feel like Bugs Bunny. You heard the beat. Skip along. about me, boy. Or whatever you call it. I can't get my left leg in front of me.
Right on. Spectacular demonstration.
Oh,
Lovely. What was that a demonstration of, by the way? It started out to be of gravity, and it wound up being of centrifugal force, I think.
nice soft baby landing. Man, Tony, you don't know how much fun this has been. We concur, John.
With the light gravity, they weren't hurt, but they were always afraid of hitting their helmets, their visors on a rock. And their camera was on their chest, so they were kind of constantly jamming that in the soil. But some lighter moments on the moon. We left a couple plaques saying farewell. On the left is Apollo 11. And on the right is what was on Apollo 17. Very similar, except in the middle is the moon with the location of all of the landings. And they're both signed by Richard Nixon, who, with this flight being in December of 72, 6 months earlier, was a small burglary at the Watergate. So that was just beginning. But these two are left, plaques. The astronauts also left a few of their own things. Besides the footprints, Charlie Duke left a picture of his family. We know that Al Shepard left some golf balls. There was the falcon feather from Apollo 15. Dave Scott left a Bible on the dashboard of the Lunar Rover. And what I think is the coolest thing, Gene Cernan, after he said his last words on the moon, with his hand on the ladder to climb up, got down on one knee and scratched in the moon soil his daughter's initials, Tracy Dawn Cernan. So they will be there for millions of years. The last goodbye. These are the words that Gene said before he climbed up for the last time from the Taurus Littrow Valley. And we shall return with peace and hope for all mankind.
10 seconds. 10 seconds. Port stage pushed. Engine arm is out. Okay, I'm going to get the pro. 99, proceeded. 3, 2, 1. Ignition. Right away, Houston. Red, you're good. Ag side. Good over.
Roger, you have good thrust.
Say with no atmosphere, you don't see any smoke like you would with a launch of like a Saturn V. So they're on their way home. Every single one of the lunar modules that landed on the moon successfully blasted off. And that's because the engine they developed was incredibly simple. It combined two chemicals together that caused the thrust reaction. They couldn't throttle it up and down. They couldn't control the nozzle. It was just press the button and off you went. It was so efficient and so simple that that engine has come out of retirement, and they're going to incorporate it in the moon vehicles that they're deciding, creating now to go back to the moon. This is an Apollo 13. This is the side of one of the command modules, because along with the beefed up lunar module, the command module got beefed up with a lot of science experiments and cameras. So the really cool thing about the science that did was the command module pilot, who usually just gets to sit around and look at the moon. He's doing other things, taking pictures and making value, but he gets to go, they all got to go on a spacewalk, 15, 16, and 17, because those were the days of film. It wasn't digital and they couldn't just download it. So it had to go outside and get the film, but they wanted to. Splashdown. This is Apollo 15. I remember it very clearly because I was shocked when the parachute didn't open up and tore. But then I remembered that it can get down on 2, and actually it's a heck of a bumpy way down, but they can get by on just one. And they call it seeing the three mains. That was always the sign that they were in good shape. And here is what the launch would look, or the splashdown would look like with all three good mains. Always a beautiful sight, the blue ocean and the red of the parachutes. What might have been the three landing sites that they canceled? One was inside a crater, Apollo 18, Gassendi. The other, which is very disappointing, Apollo 19, would have gone in Copernicus, which Kopernik, and the namesake, that would have been really neat. And Apollo 20 would have gone in Tycho. And for fans of the movie 2001 Space Odyssey, you'll remember from Tycho, by not going there, we would have missed the monolith, which was in the Tycho crater. What did we learn? We learned that the moon formed after the solar system. It wasn't part of the original forming like the Earth was, that it's ancient. It isn't something recent that the Earth captured. It settled whether the moon, it was cold moon or hot moon theories. Cold moon said that the moon was dead and cold and hasn't been active at all since its very beginning. And the hot moon people said that there was still some heat in the moon and there was still some volcanism that happened millions of years ago. So the answer is they were both right. There's not much going on in the moon right now, but it is still hot in its center and had some volcanic activity earlier. But here's the big one. Is genetically related to Earth. What does that mean? Genetically, you can't talk in terms of rocks like that. But in this case, it means that the rocks on the moon are the same rocks as the mantle of the Earth. So we're related. So the moon came from the Earth. That's the theory. And the rocks that we found were basalts, which were for the sea basins. Anorthosites were the white rocks, the older ones that we talked about. And breccias, which are smashed rocks. We'll take a look at a couple of those real quick here coming up. So we learned a lot. I mean, put a lot of theories to rest, but tip of the iceberg. There's only so much that rocks remember. We do need to do a lot more of study up there. But it led to, this is the current theory of how the moon was formed. A Mars-like object smashed in to us, ripped off part of the mantle, and that became the moon. But it's not without trouble. The theory doesn't explain why there's none of the material from what hit the Earth to do that, because the moon and the Earth are almost nearly close in what they're made of. So there's still more to look at there. And where are the rocks now? They're in the Lunar Curation Laboratory in Houston. Here's a group of 3 scientists who are got their hands through the big rubber gloves that they go through. They call them zombie arms. And in this particular picture, they're opening up a moon rock that hasn't been opened up since it came back from Apollo 16. And this is how they study them. And this is in nitrogen. And they don't expose them if they want to keep them pristine to the air. Here's what the rocks look like. This is a basalt. This was on the seas, like Sea of Tranquility. And it's lava, you can see, or volcanic, because it's got all the pits in it. This is the breccia, formed by impacts from meteors. And you can see how it's all kind of broken up and not held together very good, little pieces. That's symptomatic of those rocks. And here's the anorthosite, the older rocks that are nearly close to our Earth's crust. We have 800 pounds of those rocks. Spin-offs, just want to touch on those very quickly. I spent many with people who were very transactional about space programs. What did we get for it? We could have spent the money somewhere else. It isn't transactional, but it did have some benefits. Freeze-dried food, okay, not a biggie, but it's pretty good, especially for military foods and other things. Fireproof materials, you don't realize how our clothes don't burn. And that's great for us. And that came out of the Apollo 1 fire. Emergency blankets, you see in disasters, those Mylar, shiny aluminum ones. Digital aircraft for flying by wire. Integrated circuit boards, computers, in other words. house insulation, memory foam, pacemaker. The big one, cell phone cameras. Okay, the relative of the cell phone camera are the cameras that went on the moon, because that was the beginning of that technology, and it was greatly pushed along for Apollo. Scratch-resistant glass, GPS, and my personal favorite is Tang. I don't know if any of you remember it. Used to be a drink that was powdered like instant coffee, and put it in and made orange juice. It was horrible, but the astronauts drank it, so did we. So coming full circle with Apollo, this is beginning with Apollo 8. That's the first human flight on the Saturn V, and swinging all the way around to Apollo 17. I, however, wanted to include Apollo 1. That is the fire on the pad where the astronauts died, but their sacrifice and the improvements they made to the command module directly helped Apollos 13, Apollo 8, and really all of them, but especially Apollo 13. If you remember from the movie, or if you were on the lecture we had a couple of weeks ago, the inside of the spacecraft was so wet and moist, they're afraid that when they turn the power back on, it would all short out. But because of that fire, they had wrapped all of those cables and all of the electronics behind, so to protect it from fire, so it protected it from the water. The patch of the Apollo program, it just says it all about the Earth, the Moon, and Orion in there. That was one of our capsule names. So a little brief about the moon landings, how many people walked or flew on the Apollos. We had 6 moon landings, 12 moon walkers, brought on 840 pounds of rocks. It cost $283 billion in today's money. Now let that sink in for a minute. That's our 2020 fiscal year defense budget for the United States, more than the entire cost of the Apollo program. Not saying we don't need defense, don't get me wrong, it is a dangerous world, but it is not as expensive as you might think to get back to the moon. Will we go back? Well, we're building this large rocket over here called the Space Launch System of the Artemis program. And on the right is some conceptual art of what they would like a moon base and moon to do. The current administration gave NASA till 2024 to put boots on the ground. Always disliked that term, not sure why I used it. It sounds so militaristic, to have humans return to the moon. NASA says they're on schedule for that. I hate to be pessimistic, but for example, the Space Launch System, we've purchased 2 of those. One is going to fly up at the end of the year as a test, and at the end of 2022, there will be a human person's flight that's going to go out past the moon and come back. And then after that, they full steam want to go for landings on the moon. They're building the landers, they're building the buggies. The only problem is to find out how our space program is going. It's always best to follow the money. NASA hasn't purchased any of the space launch systems besides the 2 that they already have to take us to the end of 22. They really would have to get going if, in fact, they're going to be on 2024 and even beyond. As an example, the Apollo program ordered 15 Saturn V's. Now, that's a great sale there I'm not sure the commission anybody got on that, but that's a big order, 15, that's a commitment. So will we go back? I think without a doubt, eventually in 2024, I have my doubts. Wanted to take us even further circle to September 12, 1962, literally exactly 10 years from the last moon landing. This is President Kennedy at Rice University. They're going to play the Texans in their yearly football game. He's giving a speech promoting the space program. And then he's going to tour Houston, see all the facilities, and get from Werner von Braun all the different plans that we have. He's there with all the high officials of the space program, the Vice President Johnson, and several astronauts. This is considered one of the greatest speeches by an American president, and it is considered President Kennedy's greatest speech.
Why some say the moon, Why choose this as our goal? And they may well ask, why climb the highest mountain? Why 35 years ago, fly the Atlantic? Why does Rice play Texas? We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win, and the others too.
I'm afraid if we're going to go back to the moon, we're going to need leadership and a president that gets up to the podium and delivers a speech like that as to why we're going to the moon. These are a few of the books that went into the research for the Apollo program. They're all great books. That Man on the Moon is really fantastic. The movies were made from that. And the Doug Brinkley book is really good. And there's also the archives from NASA are fantastic. So I know we went through a lot. I know I went pretty fast-paced. I'm sorry. I wanted to make sure we got it in around an hour. So I hope you enjoyed it. And now we'll break for some questions.
All right. Again, every time you present, I just learn more and more. So thank you, first of all, Phil, for that. Let's see here. So we do have one question for sure by Cindy. It says, was the volcanic rock found on the moon formed on Earth before the moon was split off?
It was not. It was not. But they did find many pieces of the Earth, well, a couple pieces of the Earth that was blasted off the Earth and landed on the moon. So actually the oldest Earth rock we have was found on the moon.
All right. Yeah, actually, Kopernik's been fortunate to have an opportunity to display a moon rock or a portion of a moon rock. The one we typically get is the one that is brought down by John Young, and I think it was John Young and Charlie Duke, right? It was 16, yeah. And so it's actually an Alexite pyramid, which is sort of so you can get within about an inch and a half of the actual moon rock. But fortunately, we've got the staff that's trained to display it, and so that's always been a great draw for people, and for people to be able to see that. And so again, if anyone has any other questions, again, feel free to put it right in the chat. One person had said that they had missed your Apollo 11 and Apollo 12 presentations, and I said, unfortunately, we don't have those recorded because you did those live up here at Kopernik.
Yeah.
Last summer. So, but we do have the Apollo 13, and this recording, a recording of this live stream will be available on our YouTube channel afterwards. To just sort of wrap back around, I always like telling the story about the moon rock. Soon after I became the director here, we had the moon rock up on loan, and one morning, about 2:30 in the morning, I got a call from the security company that saying here that there was an open door alarm up here at Kopernik, and I knew the moon rock was up here. I says, "Oh my word, we've got to definitely get find out what's going on. So please send the police up." And one of the things we have to do is we have to show NASA that we can secure the moon rock. So the moon rock is in a special case. We then have to put that special case in a locked cabinet, and that cabinet has to have a lock, like a 4-position combination lock. That cabinet then has to be locked cabinet has to be in a locked room, and then in a locked building with a security system on it. So there clearly it's it would cost a lot to try to replace that rock. So the people, I hightailed it up here, 2:30 in the morning. The police were here. They walked through the building. After about 15 minutes, they sort of went into the vestibule and just sort of waved me in. So I walked up to the door, and the door was locked. I'm thinking, how did that happen? How did they get in? But yet, why did they lock the door? Then it finally hit me that the person who was last left in the building, when they locked the door, they didn't quite latch it. And so the door was close enough to the security system so it knew that it felt the door was closed, but it really wasn't. And then, again, we got a lot of wind up here. So 2:30 in the morning, the wind opened up the door, set off the alarm. So I said, well, I said to the officers, well, thanks for coming up here and clearing the building. And, I was really concerned because we have a moon rock here. And one of the officers goes, you have a moon rock? Oh, I got to see that. So of course I had to go open up the locked room, open up the cabinet, show him the moon rock. So I showed him the moon rock. The one officer's holding the moon rock and the in the Lexan pyramid, and then goes to hand it to the other officer, and he goes, "I'm not touching it. So I don't want my prints on it." So that's my moon rock story.
That was a great moon rock.
Anyway, Maureen asks, "What will your next presentation be?" As always, it's informative. Any thoughts on what you might like to present on next?
Yeah, I would like to do the Gemini program. It's really our forgotten program.
Mm-hmm.
It was between Mercury and Apollo, and it just kind of got overshadowed by jumping right in and doing the Apollo program. So
yeah, there's
all
some
the astronauts that flew on Apollo, most of them,
right.
their first flight was on Gemini.
Right. Actually, I just finished reading Michael Collins's Carrying the Fire book, and talks about, he actually spent a lot of time, almost more time talking about his Gemini mission than he did the Apollo mission in that book. And a lot of, and actually, Michael Collins had a spacewalk that was a little difficult for him to actually make happen, but ultimately, succeeded in doing what they needed to do. But all right, so hopefully we'll work out some details on that, and we'll look forward to having you talk to us about the Gemini program. And there's a thumbs up for the cool Gemini talk from Jim. So all right, well, good. We'll so that'll work well.
Thank you, everybody, for your time tonight. I really appreciate it.
Well, again, I think being a Friday the 13th, no better place to be than home. And although personally, I've always had good luck on Friday the 13th. But anyway, so again, for anybody who may be watching us for the first time or have yet to subscribe, if you look down below, click that subscribe button. It'll let you know. We always send emails out, but it'll let you know when we're going live and send you an email and say, "Hey, Kopernik is live." So, Jeremy may be looking at some other opportunities to do some more observing. He's been having a lot of good luck now getting his digital camera to work through our C14 reflector scope, and has had some really nice images of the of M42, the Orion Nebula. So keep subscribed to us. Again, we've got Roy Williams talking about black holes on Black Friday, November 27th, and although we won't be live streaming it, supposedly the Crew One of the SpaceX Crew Dragon is supposed to launch tomorrow. Although I guess Phil was telling me that I guess Elon Musk has potentially been diagnosed with COVID. It's unclear whether the astronauts are affected by that. I guess we'll find out tomorrow as to whether
he failed 2 tests and passed 2 tests.
Right. So I think that was sort of the quick and dirty test that are sort of prone to inaccurate conclusions. So. All right. Well, thanks again. I really appreciate y'all being here, joining us tonight. Again, whether you're wearing a Kopernik Science Park mask or whatever, please wear that mask. This situation is getting worse, and we just need to hunker down and just and just act safely and get us to the other side of this. We'd love to have everybody back up here. I mean, it's great to do live streaming of the observing, but there's nothing like putting your eye right up on an eyepiece and looking at it with your own eyes. So we look forward to having you back. So,
Well said.
Well then, take care. Have a good evening, a good Thanksgiving, and we'll see you on Black Friday. So long.